right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Robert Deeble. Robert Deeble is a singer-songwriter based out of Seattle. He has a new album out called The Space Between Us. It's his 7th album, and it's incredibly well done. You can tell Robert has spent years into honing his craft and sharpening his metaphors and stories because they take it away in this record. One thing I like about Robert's writing is he takes a lot of inspiration from novels, but when you hear it, it doesn't necessarily sound like that. It sounds like just like a very well-written song capturing the moment, but when you dig into the subtext and kind of learn more about just like the songs as he shares them or reading certain books and pick it up on characters, you kind of can dive into it a little deeper, which makes it for a fun analysis. Robert is also a full-time therapist, so we get into a conversation with the crossover of songwriting and empathetically interacting with people, and it's a really deep conversation, and I'm excited to share it. Before we get to that, if you hear anything you like, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Robert and sharing their insight with you. And now, without further ado, this is my conversation with Robert Deeble. Awesome, man. Well, to jump right into it, the record, it's beautiful. It's a very well-written record.
Thank you.
And it's produced in an extremely, I can tell, it's produced in a way that really, like, brings out each song. And, like, so it's an incredible record. But, like, to jump into it, like, you have a very interesting perspective coming from working as, a psych with a private practice. And I guess my first question is, as far as this, just musicianship and songwriting and kind of like analyzing situations, have you seen a crossover between like picking a narrative for a song or like just kind of taking an emotional like still shot of a song and kind of like just experiencing stuff through your private practice? It's a kind of vague and open question, but...
Yeah. Well, there was kind of a pinnacle point of that back in, I think it was 2013. I had a song on my Heart Like Feathers record called Hearing Voices, Seeing Ghosts, and that was directly connected to my work as a therapist, and attributed it to one of the losses I had of a client early on in my career. And the reframing of seeing that loss in a positive light and not, furthering the trauma of it. It was kind of a real life story around a crow that used to visit my window outside of my private practice a couple of years after this wonderful woman had passed away. And it reminded me of our work together, and I felt as though mystically it might have been her, which is just, I tend to be sort of a mystical, spiritual person. And so it was a graceful way of sort of thinking and being reminded about my work and continuing to further and better it. Even though I wasn't enough, I felt at the time for what she needed, but she was always very graceful to me as a client. And so the ghost or the crow was also very graceful. And so that's what that song was about. And that's probably the only time I've directly sort of referred to my practice or perhaps clinical material. And I think it does creep in, to answer your question on a general sort of way. But a lot of times I think, your brain gets kind of compartmentalized between what you're doing for work and what you're doing for your artistic practice. And sometimes it's a little bit of a mindful act to bridge the two together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's, being hyper aware and like open to helping someone, through their journey, kind of being the guide alongside the venture up the mountain you know, your experience and a lot, even though you're kind of subtly guiding someone to like hopefully find these answers and reach these, you know, this growth on their own. And like it's a super, you know, I mean I know, you know, from doing it, but it's a super delicate balance. And like, but it puts you in a situation, from my experience, because I work with the kids I work with, I do music therapy as well. And it's much different, but you know, you're still kind of on that teeter totter of building rapport and like, and also being a teacher, guiding along the, you know what I mean, like, but like the like kind of openness to like these narratives and this kind of idea of like spirituality and like it. I think it's a blessing to be able to like be that open and like just be able to pick up on. There's so many things that, you know, happen around us that we just kind of walk by.
Yeah. And we are like Sherpas. It's a good metaphor that you have. You know, I'm always mindful of that, and I train my other therapists that work with me that that's kind of how to view our work. That, you know, we don't dictate what people do, but we walk alongside them, and we get to enjoy the peaks as well as the valleys. You know, sometimes new therapists are kind of like, well, what do I do when my client is doing fine? I'm like, celebrate, enjoy, participate, you know, don't just sit there. So anyway, yeah, you know, and your question brought up another example, actually, that I had temporarily forgotten about on the new record. Now that I'm thinking about it. So our first single was The Forest from the Tree, which is the opening track of the album. And it's the last track that I wrote. So a lot of the album actually talks about relational breakdowns and polarization and the dysfunction of relationship that we're seeing in society. But the first song, in that it's the last, is kind of the capstone of the record, is kind of reasserting the hope or the reconstruction after the deconstruction, right? And so that was written from the standpoint in which two things were happening. I was working with a client that had gone through a significant loss. She had her first pregnancy and she had a stillborn birth. And so at the same time, I was participating in a very small group of other clinicians. And interestingly, one of them was my cello player on this album. She's also a therapist. And so there are about 4 of us in a consultation group. And the thing that I started to go through was the feeling that I had been with my client and her child for, you know, close to 8 months in therapy, celebrating all of her progress and her hopes. And so then when this happened, there was this countertransference of feeling this tremendous grief on behalf of her. And it started to trigger kind of my own story, in that, you know, my last album before this one was written about the adoption of my daughter. And it was a story in which we were her foster parents for a full year, and then reunited her. And when we did, we felt like that we would never see her again. And that it's a long and beautiful story, but at some point, you know, we stayed in contact with the birth mom, and we still are. And at some point, we were allowed to reunite and to adopt. But what was going on with me, with the client, was this sort of guilt that she lost hers and I got mine back, and there was no way she was going to get hers back. And I shared that with my colleagues. And I told him, I said, I feel like I'm breaking down internally. I feel like I'm a Jenga pile, and there's going to be one more brick put on this Jenga pile, and it's just going to collapse. And that was my way of being comical. I always use that as sort of like sort of a comedic way of saying I think I'm falling apart. And I remember my cellist said, Robert, you need a kinder metaphor. And just want you to encourage to think about a different metaphor than that. And so it wasn't long after that. I mean, I felt really cared for and loved by all of them in that process. But my wife came home with this book that she had picked up for her students called The Hidden Life of Trees. And it got a lot of press a few years back. And I think probably a lot of your listeners may recognize it. But it's this arborist out in Germany that has described how forests work in community much like people do. And he kind of alludes to what we find healthy about the human condition is mirrored in nature in forests. And the idea that no tree is strong by itself. It is only strong because of its root system of all the other trees alongside it. So that's how that song was created. It was this realization that I could be enough to care for the person I was caring for, because everybody else, was around me and caring for me. And so it was leaning into your vulnerability as a person rather than your pure strength. And that's how that kind of thing carried. So yeah, great example of how my practice did enter the writing and the artistic side of me at that point. And it's funny, I kind of thought I'd forgotten about it for a moment, but yeah, there's that story.
It's incredible. And like that the whole narrative of it kind of goes back to the simple thing that you're walking past by, I mean, like the crow, the tree, all these things that just happen around us, hold this weight if you're willing to read into them. It's a Zen state in that sense, the metaphor that evolves after you've spent time contemplating it. Now, so to kind of dive into your history of just songwriting and music, like, did you because when I went to school for music therapy, so it was like music was as part of the study as well as like the psych stuff. And like, did you kind of like going back, like, did you start off doing just music? Were you in bands? Did you do the whole musician route first before diving into like?
Yeah. I was one of these guys that graduated and spent 12 years kind of just wandering aimlessly as a musician, putting out records, but also trying to figure out how am I going to, support a family and all that kind of stuff. And so, I actually went to when I entered college, I had the idea that I would be a professional musician. I loved music and had been a drummer since junior high school. And so I got a small, grant to go to school as a drummer. And so I pursued that really hard. And I had taken piano and all that when I was a kid, taking lessons. And I hadn't really played with the guitar much or the piano other than just learning, that kind of stuff. But it was weird. I found that I kept failing my music theory class. And I'd have friends in that class that never took a lesson in their life and they would ace it. And there's just something about my brain. I also was failing algebra. I couldn't do music theory and I couldn't do algebra. And I think that falls into the same part of your brain. But I could imagine creatively all kinds of things. And I came to the realization that even when I was doing piano, I was mostly memorizing. I would learn a Bach piece, I would memorize it, thinking that I'm reading the music, but I'm actually just using my brain to remember it. And so I was really heavy on that creative side of my brain versus the mechanical side. And so I kind of I let that go. Uh, I stepped down from the music degree and just got kind of a general basket weaving communications degree. And then I got out of school. I did some social justice work for a while, just as my last year of college. But then I was basically started a band with a cellist, a stand-up bassist, and a percussionist because I wanted to do something different. That was back in 1990, one or two, and we formed this band called Days Like These and played all these like LA coffee houses and things like that. And eventually, we recorded the material for that first album, and I think the band, by the time that album came out, it was probably 1995 or 4, and the band was ready to move on, and so it became kind of a solo thing at that point. And I did that. A friend turned me on to some other labels and things like that, and they helped fund my second record. And so then I was basically kind of full-time musician, and I was trying to make a modest living, getting out of my hometown and traveling and playing and touring. It was mostly like small bars and clubs, but I was able to pay my band members, a small stipend that would make it worth it for them. And I was really proud of that. But we did that by selling just a ton of CDs. And of course, the MP3 came out, and then streaming, and that just killed everything. And the ability of a independent musician now has just been decimated by that technology. And I don't mean to disparage it, but it's, the hen or the fox is guarding the hen house in terms of like all the people that, were protecting your royalties and that kind of stuff. They had their heads in the sand thinking about physical product, and these other folks had come along, created invisible product that had no real legislative royalty around it. And so that's kind of a whole nother picture. But during those tours, I'm actually getting back to your question. I haven't lost it. During those tours, I stumbled onto this beautiful group of people up here in Seattle. I was from LA or Long Beach. And these people hosted me in Seattle for shows, and they were all therapists, and they were just really, really engaged with my work. And they were part of this really beautiful graduate school up in Seattle that was very imaginative and creative. And it was kind of a cross between a school of theology and a school of psychology, if you can imagine those two things together. But not closed-minded at all. And in fact, they were one of the leading schools in the area to host a lot of psychoanalytic speakers and progressive politicians and that sort of thing. They were on the theology side. I think they put more women in ministry and folks from all different types of inclusivity into ministry. So they just have a really wonderful way of engaging that stuff. And I was really pulled in by their ethos. They were very literary oriented. A lot of their classes, if we were studying, ethics, we were reading Camus' The Stranger, or we were reading Death of a Salesman, so we would read a little bit of this clinical material, but we would also read classic literature and deal with the postmodern ideas that were coming out of that. So that's how that happened. So I went in, we relocated to Seattle and kind of put roots down here, bought a little house, and I started going to graduate school. And I was trying to figure out, where that was going to take me. And I just decided that the thing I really loved the most was working with people, because it sort of it reminded me of all the touring that I did. Every time someone would come in my office and sit with me and tell me their stories, it's like we go on a road trip together. And it seemed like the only thing that I could do that sort of reminded me of being on the road, which I loved. And of course, I don't do it quite as much as I did before. And if I do, it's very, strategic and flyouts versus getting in the van and that kind of stuff. So that's how therapy, became kind of the music basically led to the therapy career. And it's been something that I've been able to continue both of them together.
It's interesting because I think like to be able to make a music career work, you have to be very astute. You have to be very naturally gifted, or you learn quickly at interpersonal relationships. Like you can't get the band to come across the country for what should be more than likely more than you can muster, you know what I mean, without being able to like really understand the people you're working with and care for them as well as yourself and what you're doing. So like I can definitely see those two skill sets go together, or even just like booking the gig and working with the PR people or whatever, there's so much interpersonal communication that happens that you develop these skills and these relationships and you're trying to build upon them as you keep going, So I could definitely like the crossover of the Venn diagram of like essential skill sets for musician and therapist I feel there's a lot in the middle. So.
Yeah, there really is. And I think musicians also learn that if they're going to do it long term, they have to be really sustainable emotionally and financially and all that kind of stuff. And so there's that in therapy as well. You have to figure out how to have the right balance of everything so that you can continue to do that work well. It's one of the things that fascinated me in graduate school was just like relationships and artists and how sometimes troubled it can become. I think I did my final research work on artists and marriages and things like that. And I'm still always very interested and curious around that. But yeah, there's and remember when I was first started my private practice, I found that all of my graphic gig making skills came into total handy as I'm making business cards or flyers or whatever. I'm like, hey, it's just like promoting a gig. I'm off to Kinko's. It's so familiar. Yeah.
That's awesome. But I think ultimately when it comes down to like a self practice or a self business of any sort, you know what I mean? Like jumping into the field right away with music, which is any creative field, everyone's like, oh, that's an uphill battle, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like it's already known to be an uphill battle and everyone's just already banking. I mean, not that people are thinking about themselves, but like societally, it's kind of like, you're going to, good luck. You know what I mean? Like, but it sucks. But like, but I do think those skills cross over and that kind of makes it already like an easier like guide into like, I'm doing this now for myself. You know what I mean? Like I'm running this business now. Like,
yeah. And when you hear people's stories, there's something about, being creative with their stories really helps them a lot, versus just being clinical and giving them advice. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But, as they begin to relay their story and you hear a theme there, like you would as a songwriter, and you bring that theme back to them and wonder about it and curiosity, that seems to be a place that people really resonate and feel seen and heard in therapy. And so it's a little bit like jazz. I'm not a big jazz player, but I love jazz. But it's like as someone brings you their data and you're playing off of it live in a session. And then it can feel very alive, unless someone is very, very depressed and you're just trying to desperately bring something out of them. That's always the hardest work, you know?
Oh yeah. I gotta imagine but I mean, like I think the power of metaphor in that sense is so much more impactful.
Yeah.
And like,
yes.
And as a songwriter goes, it's the same way too. Like whenever the listener can come to their own conclusion, it's interesting because I think with pop music in a sense, like at least like kind of pop country writing, there's a lot of just relatable, descriptive writing, I mean, products and things that we all know.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually the chorus of the hook is that kind of like metaphoric or just like on the nose doy thought, I mean, that you're like, oh yeah, but like, so I gotta imagine like coming into it with all this kind of deep thought, with like thinking about it, and coming from a school that seemed to really kind of hone in more on like how you said the literature, like I think there's a certain thing within people that gets ecstatic about kind of having that metaphoric like dopamine spike of I kind of solved my own thing, because and I think we carry that with us, right? Like if we listen to a Dylan song and there is something in that I'm also tangled up in blue. That's a really horrible like I'm saying on the nose example, like, but you know what I mean, like
yeah,
we carry that, like people get that tattooed to their arm, you know what I mean, like there's something to the power of that.
Yeah. It's so true. And images really play a huge role in my life. I've come to realize over the years. I was kind of alluding to it in my early story about just playing piano. I wasn't reading the notes. I was memorizing notes. And I think images are how I'm able to remember things. So all of my lyrical content is tied in some way to an image that inspired, whatever words I was using. And I've often wondered how I'm able to remember songs that I wrote, close to 30 years ago. And I've come to the realization that it's the image that then triggers the words. So if I remember the image that was kind of guiding my thought, then the words kind of fall into place, which I've heard people talk about, that is a thing neurologically. But it makes sense to how, like, I was always so graphically inclined. And even after I got out of, my bachelor's, when I was playing music, I was also working as a graphic artist on the side. And that's how I would, make a little extra money here and there. So those two things have always kind of worked hand in hand. And I know that when I'm writing an album, like the exciting thing is when somehow the image comes into place of like, what is the theme of the record? And a lot of times when the image falls in place, and in this particular case, as I was writing, a lot of this material on this last record are bits, songs that were kind of demoed earlier, either around a book or a different idea. And I started to notice they had kind of some similar theme of some form of deconstructive relationship. And then, of course, we were in the middle of this really highly polarized period of history. I'm going to be 59 this year, so it's like I can attest that I've never felt like what we're feeling now. That hasn't been a thing all along. I keep telling my daughter, this is not the way it's always been.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing as I'm writing this, like final songs, and I'm, it was all this, reading the book on trees, and suddenly I remember my friend's photography posted on Facebook from the Netherlands of these trees, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's been that's been unconscious with me for like 2 years. and I, reached out to him. He was thrilled. But it's like the moment that image got locked in for the record, then everything kind of came together and all the pieces. It was like that final jigsaw piece. But so yeah, it's funny how you know images play such a strong role in my creative process.
Well, it makes a lot of sense in a way, because it's kind of like, at least when capping an album like that, you're looking at all these different, or even just within one song, like if you know what the story is, the place that it's supposed to be taking place, because most songs are very timeline. They don't jump around too deeply. Like I think of, like, when you go with Orphans, your song Orphans,
Hmm.
like, the Carter family stories, it's fascinating by itself. And it's like,
Yeah.
and like, it makes, for me, when I first learned about that, I'm like, oh my God, Johnny Cash just got even cooler for somehow finding his way into this lineage. But like,
Hmm.
but but like, just taking like the vagueness of like what you can write so many like narratives about that family's interactions and the strangeness and like the emotional like turnover. Just like it could have been, that could have been about the recording session they had, but to base it on that interaction of that relationship, like to put that image in there and like kind of zoom in at this one emotional encounter, like, and then kind of it makes so much more sense how like impactful it can be. Like, not that like I kind of scattermined with where we were painting this narrative, but like it makes a lot of sense, like image wise, to kind of be able to see what you're honing in on, I guess is what I want to say.
Oh yeah.
And like,
Oh yeah. Totally.
so with the idea of like, because I, for myself, I find myself, working pretty relentlessly, like doing the gigs and doing the teaching and the whole ad, like, of everything, and doing this, and I find myself doing a lot of graphic and video editing work, and you know what I mean, like, with you, do you have like, as far as just like a writing practice that you do, like how within like being able to cook up all the soap notes, like how do you have like a time of week, day, or just like that you
Oh,
actually
right.
sit and write songs, or do you just do it when inspiration hits?
Yeah. No, it's I always admire people that are very disciplined and write in the morning or whatever, and I'm not like that most of the time. And I think part of it is because um, I have always been my own label. I mean, I have been on a couple of labels, but I've always had a very strong input, even when I was. And I've always primarily owned all of my stuff, which is how I've been able to, create the box set that I sell. And, because I own these records, or they were handed back to me in the end. But, so the problem with that is that your artist brain gets split up and compartmentalized into different seasons. And where you're in that initial writing season, that's the most precarious, because it's like you're having to battle. This feels really dumb when it's not. It's just that's your critic brain that's getting involved and saying, I'm not sure this idea really makes sense. And there's another part of you that's like, no, I think it will. Just shut up for a while. And and we always talk about that, the artistic critic in our minds. We need to shut that down. But it also has a really important component, and that is after that song is 75% there, then you welcome that critic back, and that critic kind of comes back in and says, how will this song stand the test of time, and will people enjoy it 20 years from now, and what can change to make it more universal, or what can move your myopic focus so that other people can enjoy it other than just fans of the Carter family or whatever. And that critic is like the producer brain, right? It's what a producer does when you go into the studio is they sort of broaden out the focus so that it can be, you know, open to some different ideas and that kind of thing. Or maybe if you're a writer of a novel, then you create these characters, and eventually the characters start telling you what to do. So there's that part of it. But then at some point I go into production mode, and then I shut down the open-minded, creative, whatever ideas come to me brain. And I'm thinking about how to, you know, record these songs in a way that really honor them, and work with whatever producer I've chosen to really get this stuff to the next level. And of course, then you're not writing in the morning. You know, you're getting up in the morning and you're setting up a time to go into the studio, and you're getting the band together, or you're trying to get the band to perform the material. And then ultimately the next stage is you get into physical production, and you're listening to mixes and all that time, but you're also now working with, you're either putting the physical product together and the images of how you're going to relay these ideas and these songs, image wise, and perhaps working with some artists that are doing the LP and the CD and all this kind of stuff. And you're into that. And then it moves into promotion. And then you're like, I've done all this work writing these little orphan songs, and I want the world to hear them. And so how do I get them out to people that actually have a chance to encounter them? And so all of those stages of the brain are kind of different, and I play all those parts. And so if I was signed to a larger label that could handle some of this stuff, I could just be writing all the time, probably. Although I will be honest with you, I think my ADD brain would be kind of like, I can only handle so much pure artistry at one time. I have to move to something mechanical or whatever. So that's a little bit how my brain works. And so I go through seasons of writing, and then seasons of demoing, and then seasons of going into the studio, and then seasons of putting the physical product out, which I love that process as well.
It is rewarding to be like, here it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that there's like the Joe Strummer adage of like lyrics are lettuce. You know what I mean? Like, and I think like in the sense of being able to compartmentalize that and like fully embrace these different seasons of like the creation of the creative like life cycle of a project. I think that's like, it's a healthy balance of all that. Because I find myself,
there's that word again.
Yeah. Well, balance is always going to be key. And it's interesting that like how hidden we can make balance. You know what I mean? Like how like kind of tunnel visioned we can be to like that's Corrados and just anyone who's trying to see through a thing, you know, can be to get through the keep hitting the gym. You know what I mean? I don't know. But I guess to totally bounce and to maybe what would have been like a demoing or like this would have been like a actually tracking. I've talked with Stephen Hodges and like my band. We've played with MSSV a few times, and like
good.
You know, they're incredible. So you've worked with Stephen. Can you tell me about working with Stephen?
Yeah, Stephen's one of my musical mentors. It's a little bit of how my story starts. I was telling you about it. Got out of college and I put this band together with a cellist, a stand-up bassist, percussionist, and we were kind of putting these tunes together, but I didn't know how to formally score anything. I was just like painfully chicken scratching it out on a piece of paper and trying to do what I could to make it all happen. And, you know, over the course of, 4 or 5 years, this was a bit of a mess because we tried to go into all these different studios to track this unusual ensemble, and people didn't quite know what to do with it. And so we had all of these, things kind of started in different studios and different tracks and all. It was starting to get a little bit disparaging for me. And one of my last engineers, Anton Arvisu, Stephen was married to his sister at the time, and Antoine introduced me to Steve, and he said, I think you'd really benefit from having a producer. And I was kind of like, well, I thought you were, and it's like, well, I'm kind of the engineer, but I think you might enjoy working with Stephen. He's been playing with Tom Waits, and he lives here in town. And so this is, of course, when I lived in Long Beach, and I was privy to a lot of Long Beach had an underbelly of some really amazing artists that were basically feeding all the bigger bands in LA. And so we had kind of our underground music scene of really talented people, but we didn't have like the main venues and things like that LA had. So, Hod was a part of that. And so I was introduced to him, and we just hit it off immediately. And I remember he would listen to some of these songs, and like one of these songs was literally just a gigantic instrumental orchestration piece. I mean, that's how nutty I was about this band idea. I was like, what? I want to have a rock band that actually did like an orchestra piece, but I don't want it to be like ELO or something like 70s rock or anything like that. But anyway, he would we would chart these parts out, and he would be like, this needs something here. And you could kind of see his mind kind of going into this place. And he would say, I think what it needs is a conga. And I'm like, a conga? It's like, I don't have any Latin America going on in this song. I don't know where you're getting it. He goes, no. A conga with a level 4 drumstick on hitting the side of it just needs a big whack right there. And I'm like, I realized he's thinking like Tom Waits or something, and just something to trigger something else to introduce the next thing. So basically, I learned from Hodges how to kind of formulate ideas, how to create structure in the writing that I was doing, but also how to expand it in unusual landscapes. And so that was very formative to me. I learned how to really feel the music rather than just to think about it. And later, Hodge would then become a really primary player on the second album. He produced the first, and he did a little bit of percussion on the first, but he really had a even stronger role on the second album. And some of his percussion is highly focused on that as well. That really made it I think my second album became kind of that, what do you call it? It formed a little bit more of who I am, and has always been kind of the record a lot of people go back to. It was EarthSide Down. But so I learned a lot from Hodges, just to make music intuitive, and to be to feel it, and to not overplay it and not overthink it, which is probably one of my weak spots. And Hodges and I have stayed in close touch, and I had a chance to open up for MSSV as well. That's cool that you did. It was really fun, but you can just kind of see that same sort of thing, like when MSSV is playing and Hodge starts pulling the chains over his snare. It's that same type of like this needs a conga. What? Slap. Oh. And so just that kind of stuff I adore. Has a small role in this album, but he has kind of been throughout most of my records. He pops in and out on most of my records. This is my 7th, so
which is incredible. That's a huge amount of work, but it shows relentless like dedication to doing it and experiencing. And like this record, I think definitely holds up next to any of those. It's a beautiful record. And I have one more question, and I really appreciate your time and your flexibility. So throughout your tours, like, have you been to Cleveland, and do you have any memorable Cleveland moments?
Oh, what a great question. Yes, but I can't remember where. Just after my 2nd record was recorded, I got invited to open up for a band called the Vigilantes of Love, and I toured throughout all of the Midwest, including Cleveland, as their opening artist. And I cannot remember the different clubs that we played. Do you know some of the more historic ones?
Yeah, like maybe the Agora, the Beachland, the Grog Shop. I'm trying to think of like the Agora, Beachland, Grog Shop. What would have been around by maybe the Odeon?
Odeon sounds familiar. I think we were typically playing maybe no more than a 300-person room, sometimes smaller.
Yeah, but it had to be like the Grog or the Beachland.
Yeah,
something like that. But
anyway, I have like a general memory of just all of the Midwest being so different than the coastal cities.
Yeah,
So, well, I guess what I would say is that on the coast, people were so inundated with good art that they take it for granted. And you get out into larger spatial parts of the country, and you get a different culture sometimes, but also you get people that just deeply value what comes to town. And that was really noticeable to me, that we were just, the excitement of people interested in what you're doing. And it made those road trips really meaningful.
I definitely think that's true. Cleveland's definitely a listening town, and like, it makes sense just because like it goes back to kind of what we talked about earlier today. You ignore the crow or the tree at the window, until you don't see it that much. But
I will tell you, I obviously spent a lot of time walking around over the Rhine, because that's where the studio was located, Cincinnati, Ohio. And so, Rich has basically purchased a small church house in the 90s, I think $80,000 at the time, and that's become his studio. And so he's been able to have low overhead and all that kind of stuff and stay sustainable. And so I would just fly out there and live in the studio for a little while to get my parts done, and then walk around town when I wasn't recording. And so I have more of a recent memory of that part of Ohio.
In Cincinnati, there's some good funk that came out of Cincinnati. There's some good music that came out of everywhere in Ohio, but I think that, like, I don't know, being able to escape, for you to kind of escape and focus like that, did that help with wrapping the record?
Say that again. What was the question?
Well, from leaving, from coming out to Cincinnati, and like, aside from just working with your friend, but just being able to kind of get away, did that like kind of help focus and finish the record?
Yeah, it does. anytime you travel, I think it really helps kind of zero in your focus. And I liken that to when I would leave my hometown and I would tour and play small clubs around the country. I was a different person out of state than I was in my own hometown. There was more confidence and focus out of state. It was just a thing that I kind of noticed. I was kind of like, wow, who is this guy? I don't recognize him. And sometimes that gets you in trouble too, because you get a little too into yourself. But there is something about leaving what you're familiar and kind of putting all the chips on the table and trying to make a go at it. And that does happen, I think, in the studio as well. Heart Like Feathers, both Heart Like Feathers and This Bar Has No One Left were recorded in Portland, and I would basically live in the studio while those were being recorded. And the band at the time stayed with me, and it was a time where we got really close as a band because we were just living in a studio. And then, same thing here with this new record. It was an interesting kind of a juxtaposition of it was being kind of managed in Cincinnati, Ohio, but there were contributions from all over the country, including my own home demo studio in Seattle. A lot of the Wurlitzer parts were recorded in my own studio, and the skeleton tracks were created there. But then I would want to have Rich work with me personally when it came to my vocals and my guitar parts and all that, which Rich is a virtuoso guitarist, so that was a little overwhelming. He used to be the guitarist for the band Over the Rhine, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, so having him kind of oversee I remember he was like, "Aren't you going to change your guitar sheet?" I'm like, "Oh, is that a thing?"
Yeah,
Okay.
you do it every 30 minutes here in the studio. You're like, oh shit.
Yeah, right. I'm kind of like, I'm sort of like a flat round guy. But anyway, yeah. So once you're there, that's all you're thinking about. You're not being distracted by all the other things of life. And there's a good thing about that to a point, right? And it goes back to the balance of and I just have a really fortunate relationship with my wife and our daughter that they kind of allowed Dad those times in which that focus is treated, as a family, really important. And at the same time, when I'm back at home, that's where I try to really be engaged with them, because it's this sort of, like you said, the seesaw balance, right? And just knowing that my family's going to be the healthiest if I'm an engaged dad and not like Pleasant Carter always running off to write some new song, but that I'm attending to what's happening with the three of us. And then there's that important part of my own self-care in which I'm dreaming up something or thinking of a song. And that's where Dad's downstairs in the studio, and it's like, unless there's a fire up there, give him a little space. And so that kind of trade-off, I think, I'm very grateful for how that's evolved in terms of our family.
Well, and I think that's an incredible, to have a creative outlet and to be able to develop some self routine around it where you can be balanced like that. I think it's an incredibly important. And I think a lot of people strive to find that. And I'm happy that you found it, my friend. So Robert,
I think we're always discovering it and finding it and rediscovering it. But
right. Whatever that work life, really, there's so much. We have so many things we have to attend to. It's just the balance of figuring out how to do it and being with people who can allow that. Who are balanced enough in their own adventure of life to be able to allow that. incredibly important and impactful. But Robert, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the flexibility. I know I'm bouncing, and I know you got another thing coming up. So thank you very much, man.
All right. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.